Still haven't figured it out? You're really an idiot. Huh? What are you talking about? When I asked back, Holly revealed a shocking truth. The father of the twins is Ronald. Ignoring my shock, Ronald stood beside Holly and said, "Sorry. You're a defective, infertile woman. You're no longer needed. I'm marrying her, so can you get a divorce? Also, find a place and move out within a week. What do they think of me?" I clenched my teeth and vowed revenge. I'll make them regret treating me like this. My name is Alice, a 42-year-old housewife. Ronald, who is the same age as me, and I have been married for 3 years, but our meeting was a bit unusual. I was jogging in the local park when I accidentally bumped into Ronald. The dog he was walking at the time got excited and jumped at my feet. At first, I was surprised, but Ronald immediately apologized, bowing his head, "I'm very sorry. My control was poor." "It's okay. I was just a little startled," I replied, and Ronald smiled in relief. I was drawn to his sincerity and friendly smile. His dog again frolicked around me, and we started talking and laughing. "This little guy is so friendly, it's troublesome," Ronald said. "He's adorable." "What's his name?" I asked. "Latte. We often play here." From that day on, we ran into each other at the park more frequently. Meeting Ronald and Latte naturally led us to converse and gradually get to know each other. "How far are you planning to run today?" "I think I'll stretch it to about 3 miles today," I answered. "That's impressive." "I need to work harder too," he said, and we often ended up running together. After jogging, we would rest on a park bench and talk about our daily lives and hobbies. "What's your favorite music, Alice?" Ronald asked, or I'd ask, "What do you do on your days off, Ronald?" As time passed, our relationship deepened, and we became important to each other. Eventually, we started dating, and 2 years later, we naturally began thinking about marriage. During this time, Ronald proposed seriously, "Alice, I want you to be with me forever." My answer was, of course, yes. And so, we decided to get married. When I first met his mother before the wedding, she welcomed me warmly. However, on the wedding day, she hugged Ronald tightly and cried, shouting that she would miss him. His obsession made everyone around us laugh awkwardly. I thought it was just affection and didn't see any problem with it. However, this was a sign of the worst future to come. At that time, I couldn't imagine such a future awaited us. Thus began our married life. I thought our happy days were just beginning, and at first, it seemed to be going well. But 6 months after the wedding, Ronald, who had treated me so well during our courtship, changed drastically. Ronald wasn't one to hurl insults, but he frequently criticized my clothing and behavior, trying to make me comply. Repeating that he wanted to protect me, he began to excessively interfere with and control my life. The problem started the day I chose a slightly short skirt. When he saw me about to go out, Ronald looked displeased and questioned me, "That outfit looks like you're trying to attract men." Confused by his accusation, I hesitated, and he continued, "Wearing such revealing clothes is vulgar. You're married now, you should dress more modestly." I couldn't understand how a skirt that was about 10 centimeters above the knee was vulgar, but I asked, "So, Ronald, what do you think I should wear?" He pulled out a plain, long skirt from the closet and handed it to me. "This is the most decent piece of clothing you have. Short skirts are all unacceptable. What do you expect to happen when you attract men's attention? There are a lot of weirdos out there, you need to be more careful." He was earnest in his persuasion, and I lost the will to argue. We ended up canceling the shopping trip that day, but a few days later, a bunch of plain, long skirts arrived. "This is perfect. There's no need to dress up when you're out." Ronald said this, but I countered. "Then what should I do with the clothes in the closet? Wear them at home. There's no need to show them off outside. Also, you should tone down your makeup. It's too flashy." He said this with a smile. He even tried to stop me from going to the beauty salon. If you really want to go, I'll cut your hair for you. When he made that suggestion, I was horrified. Is he serious? I thought. I use my salary to pay for makeup and haircut expenses. So it's strange for you to say such things. Aren't you being a bit too controlling? I cautiously pointed out, and after thinking it over, Ronald said lightly. Fine. You can keep your makeup and beauty salon visits. But from now on, I want you to wear the clothes I choose when you go out. You're my wife, after all. Although I agreed, I couldn't bring myself to go out dressed like that. I ended up secretly changing into a dress in the restroom before going out. Though I was allowed to visit the beauty salon, Ronald started to interfere with my hairstyle as well. As my wife, don't have a hairstyle that attracts men. Unable to endure his constant complaints, I cut my long hair short and changed it to a bob. Alice, you look completely different. Like a different person. An acquaintance I ran into was surprised, but I vaguely smiled and avoided giving details. I was honestly tired of Ronald's persistent instructions. However, his reasoning, Alice, you're my wife. It's a problem if you stand out to other men. I worry about you, was hard to argue with, so I had no choice but to comply. Moreover, Ronald wasn't pleased about me meeting friends. So I ended up having to report who I was meeting and when I'd be back, and even send proof photos each time. Ronald was particularly displeased when there were men at the dinner parties, often coming to pick me up. Even if I told him I was coming straight home, it was clear he feared I might get close to another man. It was obvious he didn't trust me. I would always respond with an awkward smile when people said, "It's because you're newlyweds, your husband must really care about you." Meanwhile, Ronald went out drinking every weekend, claiming it was for work. When I complained, he countered, "I'm not going because I want to. If I cut down on these outings, it would affect my job." However, I couldn't argue with, it would be a problem if my salary decreased. I'm the one earning more. He tried to reassure me by saying, "I can't take photos since it's a proper business gathering, but there's nothing suspicious." I had no choice but to nod in agreement. With busy weekdays and weekend drinking sessions, the only time we had to relax at home was on Sunday nights. Despite this, Ronald pressured me about having children. I want to show my mother a grandchild while she's still healthy. I'd prefer a boy, but a girl will do. He said this condescendingly. It didn't work out this month either? I'm sorry. I really want to fulfill your mother's wish. I was anxious too, but every time, Ronald would pat my shoulder and say, "Let's keep trying. I'm counting on you." His indifferent attitude really wore me out. Does he think I can have a child on my own? It's been 2 years since we got married, but there's still no sign of a child. Around this time, I began to feel that natural conception might be difficult. Of course, I'm checking my menstrual cycle and basal body temperature and carefully choosing my diet. Since it's said that keeping warm is good for fertility, I soak in lukewarm water for 30 minutes and warm my body with ginger and herbal tea. But Ronald just nods disinterestedly when I talk about these things. I've told him many times to cut back on smoking and drinking, but he shows no signs of trying to comply. Even when I suggest timing intimacy for optimal fertility, he prioritizes fishing and drinking outings. Sometimes I wonder if he really wants a child. On the other hand, my mother-in-law has become increasingly vocal about wanting a grandchild. Ronald's parents' house is an hour's drive from our apartment. She finds excuses to call us over during every holiday. Although she could just call Ronald, she often insists that I come along too. After retirement, Ronald's father is busy with golf and volunteering, so he's rarely home. As a result, my mother-in-law is lonely, spending most of her time watching TV or chatting with friends. Her hobby is gossiping with the neighborhood housewives, and I get dragged into it. What's more troubling is that she brings up the topic of grandchildren, pressuring me to have one soon. Hey, Alice. The Brown family is boasting about their third grandchild. It's terrible, isn't it? Yes. It is. I can only reply. Also, the Miller family just had their second grandchild, a boy, and they live with their son. Isn't that wonderful? My mother-in-law wishes we lived with her, but Ronald refuses because it would be too far from his workplace. That's another reason for her dissatisfaction. So, she often presses me to give her a grandchild soon. Because of these ongoing conversations, I wanted Ronald to help out, but as soon as we arrived at his parents' house, he would go out to hang with friends. My son works hard, so he deserves to see his friends, my mother-in-law would defend him. As a result, I often found myself stressed and alone at my in-laws' house. While my mother-in-law prepared the meals, it was my job to clean up. And the pressure to have a grandchild lingered. You've been married for 2 years, why don't you have a child yet? Are you avoiding it on purpose? When she accused me like that, I would sometimes retort, that's not true. But when she said, at this rate, I might not see a grandchild before I die, I was at a loss for words. Ronald, fiddling with his phone, would give a nonchalant smile and say, well, Mom, Alice is doing her best. Hearing this made me even angrier at his attitude, as if he bore no responsibility. In our 3rd year of marriage, Ronald suddenly stopped talking about having children. At the same time, he started working on weekends and going on more business trips, and our weekend dates came to an abrupt end. When I timidly suggested a date, he would often coldly decline, saying, I'm busy, maybe next time. Our dog Latte, who we both loved, also passed away, leaving me without my only comfort. I continued to receive the same poor treatment from my mother-in-law. Whenever I visited, she used to brag endlessly about other people's grandchildren, but that suddenly stopped. One day, I arrived early at my in-laws' house and parked in the usual meter parking before walking over. Ronald was supposed to join me after running some errands. When I arrived, I saw a woman in a loose dress chatting familiarly with my mother-in-law at the entrance. I'm so happy you came back, Holly. I'm counting on you. Likewise, thank you. As the woman noticed me, my mother-in-law changed her expression and gave me a meaningful smile. Nice to meet you. I'm Holly, a neighbor. Nice to meet you. Holly looked me up and down and smirked. Thank you for today, Holly. See you later. It was clear their conversation was interrupted, and my mother-in-law hurried Holly out. Afterward, she invited me into the living room and served tea, but she was clearly distracted. A while later, Ronald showed up, and he and my mother-in-law began whispering in another room. When Ronald returned, he had a bright expression, as if hiding something. 6 months later, while Ronald was away on a business trip for 2 days, Holly showed up at our apartment with a newborn for some reason. Apparently, Ronald had returned with Holly. I had gone shopping, and when I got back, they were there. Look, I had twins, Holly said excitedly, showing off the babies. Welcome home. But why is Holly here? When I asked, Holly answered for him. I'm actually Ronald's ex-girlfriend. Really? I tried to stay calm, but Holly was irritated. Still haven't figured it out? You're really an idiot. Huh? What do you mean? When I asked back, Holly revealed a shocking truth. The father of the twins is Ronald. Ignoring my shock, Ronald stood beside Holly and said, I should have married Holly. If it weren't for that fight back then, I wouldn't have ended up with a woman like you. It's not too late to start over. Your mom likes me, and we can make this work. Holly said this confidently. Ronald smiled happily. Mom has always liked Holly. She's thrilled that we got back together. And she was so impressed that Holly got pregnant right away with twin boys. See? I'm different from her. Holly continued. Then they both looked at me and laughed maliciously. Sorry, you're an infertile defective. You're no longer needed. I'm marrying her, so can you get a divorce? Also, find a place and move out within a week. Stunned, I was left speechless. Ronald placed the divorce papers on the table and left with Holly. I heard their laughter fading down the hallway. Am I being abandoned now? I thought, hanging my head. Ronald's constant nagging was not out of love, but a desire for control. While I stood there holding the divorce papers, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. "If you get in the way of those two, I won't forgive you." Her sharp tone was the first thing I heard. "Honestly, I never liked you from the start." I couldn't understand why Ronald chose such a plain woman. "Is that so?" "Sorry to hear that," I replied sarcastically. "I was going to accept you as my daughter-in-law if you had a child, but you completely failed. You're useless." I was the one who told Ronald that Holly was back. Then they got back together immediately. They're a perfect match. "So, you orchestrated the affair?" I asked in shock. "Yes, I did. I always wanted Holly to be my daughter-in-law. She got pregnant right away, an ideal wife. So, I'm the one to blame? Of course. A wife who can't bear children has no value. That's why we had to replace you." With these unbelievable words, my mother-in-law ended the call abruptly. Filled with anger and disappointment, I gripped my phone tightly. What do they think I am? I can't tolerate being treated like this. Clenching my teeth, I vowed revenge. Ronald, my mother-in-law, and Holly. I'll make them regret putting me through this. A little later, Ronald contacted me multiple times. "Hey, haven't you moved out yet?" It's been over a week. I had been buying time by saying I was busy. Even after filing for divorce, I had a mountain of things to do. When I was finally ready and called Ronald and my mother-in-law to the apartment, they all looked displeased. "Holly wants to live here instead of her own apartment. Please move out quickly. It's hard to keep staying at my parents' house. The divorce papers have been filed, so just go somewhere. You seem to still have feelings for Ronald, but he's already Holly's now. Let's set aside the complaints and get on with it." I responded calmly to the commotion in the kitchen. Ronald and Holly sat facing each other, with my mother-in-law next to them. I returned to my seat after setting out tea and started with harsh words. "First of all, there is no way I still have feelings for your son. I don't need another irresponsible person who not only lies and manipulates but also has a child with someone he cheated on you with. He's a pathetic, helpless piece of garbage in the eyes of society." Ronald looked unsettled by my words. "You can badmouth me all you want. But unless you leave, we can't move into this new place." I hit him with the facts. "Did you forget? My parents paid for most of this house." "Huh? Did they?" Ronald looked at me, surprised. It seems his memory conveniently lapses. "You brag about working for a big company, but it's not all that impressive." I sneered. "The rest was split between you and me. So this house is in my name. Which means this is my house." Holly and my mother-in-law were shocked. "Ronald, is that true?" Well, maybe. "Yeah, I think so." "Fine, we'll leave this house to you." "Holly, let's find another place," Ronald said arrogantly, but Holly puffed her cheeks in dissatisfaction. I was looking forward to using Ronald's study. "Don't worry. I'll ask Dad to buy us a new house. It's thanks to Ronald's earnings that we could live here, but to say such things, you're a terrible wife." My mother-in-law sneered. I smiled confidently. "Oh, that's not true. Actually, this is where it gets interesting." "Huh? What do you mean?" "I've been gathering evidence." I pulled out an envelope with the investigation report and photos and spread them on the table. Seeing this, Ronald and Holly turned pale and began to panic. They quickly grabbed the photos and tried to hide them in their pockets or bags. My mother-in-law, looking displeased, demanded, "What are you hiding? Show me." "Don't worry, there are plenty more images left." I pulled out my phone and started showing the slideshow. Ronald and Holly tried to snatch the phone, but I stopped them. My mother-in-law's face changed as she saw the screen. "What is this? Do you have other lovers too?" The screen showed Holly and Ronald each being intimate with different people. "Don't believe that. Alice must have made it up." "Yeah, she's sneakier than she looks," Holly added, flustered. I calmly replied, "There's no way I could prepare such evidence on my own. I hired a detective. It's undeniable. If you don't believe me, check with the agency yourself." Showing them the detective's business card made Ronald and Holly look even more distressed. After a long silence, Ronald admitted, "Yeah, I was seeing other people. I can do whatever I want with my money. The guys wouldn't leave me alone. I can't help it. And Ronald, you said I was the only one, you liar," Holly shouted. "You're the same way. After all, it could have been anyone." "Shut up." They started arguing fiercely. My mother-in-law tried to scold them, holding her head in exasperation. "I can't believe it. After everything I've done for you. I'm so disappointed." Watching this scene, I burst out laughing. They looked at me in surprise as I laughed uncontrollably. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's just funny to see you pretending to be a decent person." "What? If you had done your job as a wife, Ronald wouldn't have cheated," she snapped back at me. "If you had devoted yourself to Ronald and had children, he wouldn't have looked at Holly. It's all your fault." I was stunned by her words, especially considering she had orchestrated Ronald and Holly's affair. While I was speechless, Ronald and Holly took the opportunity to raise their voices. "Yeah, it's your fault, Alice. You couldn't satisfy your husband or have kids. No wonder he got bored." Poor Ronald. Ignoring them, I moved on to the next topic. "By the way, mother-in-law, you seem to be quite active yourself." I placed another photo on the table, and she was at a loss for words. Ronald and Holly gasped in shock. "Seriously? Mom, you have a lover too?" "Yes, a European lover." "Quite impressive," I said with a smile. "I also have an audio recording of your date. Let's hear it." "You're not hiding anything, right?" Ronald said. It was a recording made by the detective in a cafe. "Francois, I'll have the money ready soon," her voice said, clearly excited. "My son's new in-laws are wealthy. I'll get the money from them easily. That woman is simple. This will cover your sister's surgery, right? Don't worry about $60,000. I love you too." Hearing her delighted voice, Ronald and Holly stared at her with wide eyes. "Who is this Francois? Is he really your lover?" Holly asked. "Don't worry, everything's fine," my mother-in-law said with a smile. "He's from Italy. He couldn't afford the surgery for his sick sister, so I helped him out." She proudly puffed out her chest as she spoke. "He likes older women with big hearts like me. When I gave him $60,000, he cried with joy. He's a good kid." As she spoke dreamily, Ronald looked utterly confused. What does this mean? Isn't Francois a French name? This all sounds fishy. He might be the type who cons women for money." "Don't insult Francois," my mother-in-law shouted at Ronald, making Holly hold her head in her hands. "So she was supporting us? I can't believe this old hag." "Calm down, Holly." Ronald tried to soothe her. "Thanks to Mom, we got back together. Can't you just say thank you?" Ronald smiled. "I might have been interested in other women, but I really love Holly. You gave me children, and I want us to stay close," he suggested to Holly. Relieved, Holly smiled. "Yes, I was wrong too. But Ronald, you're the best. Let's keep being happy together." After looking at each other for a moment, they turned to me. "Is this over? We're leaving now." "Yeah, we need to pick up our kids from the babysitter. You wouldn't understand, being abandoned by Ronald and all." I checked the clock on the wall. "Wait a bit longer. They should be here soon." Just then, the doorbell rang. I checked the intercom and let the visitors in. Ronald, Holly, and my mother-in-law looked confused as two men appeared. "Dad?" Ronald said. "And who are you?" He asked the older man behind his father. Did you forget? He's the doctor who conducted your infertility test. Your dad introduced him. Oh, right, Ronald remembered. Holly looked anxious. What? I didn't know about an infertility test. I didn't mention it? Ronald responded casually, making Holly frown. Why are you here? I answered on the doctor's behalf. I visited you directly, but you were busy with Holly and the twins. So I explained everything to your dad, and he brought the doctor here. Ronald frowned at my explanation. The doctor looked at me, and I nodded. He sighed and spoke heavily. Ronald, you are infertile. With that one statement, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. Ronald and my mother-in-law shouted in surprise. The doctor continued with a serious expression. There was no problem with your wife. Ronald, your sperm count is extremely low. In this condition, you can't have children. When the doctor placed the test results on the table, my mother-in-law, Ronald, and Holly stared at them. Ronald and Holly immediately shouted. What? Wait a minute, I'm infertile? I can't believe this. This is impossible. Holly, panicking, started pulling her hair and screamed. Infertile? This ruins everything. What are we supposed to do now? Ruin everything? What do you mean? I went back to Ronald because a corporate employee has a better future than a part-time model, but this is awful. I've been tricked. Holly rambled on as Ronald's expression turned to anger. Wait a minute, Holly, I forgave your affair to start fresh, and now you're bringing this up again? I believed we could make it work. Ronald shouted angrily at Holly. What? You had flings with other women too. You have no right to blame me. My affairs were just for fun. It's completely different from your serious cheating. We and the doctor watched their pathetic argument in silence. No one felt like intervening, we just observed quietly. I rejected other men and chose you as the father. You should be grateful. I don't deserve this. I interrupted their argument. So, it wasn't my fault we couldn't have children. It was Ronald's. When Holly and Ronald called me defective for being infertile, they were actually talking about Ronald. When I said this, Ronald and Holly glared at me with resentment. Ignoring them, I quoted back what my mother-in-law had once told me. You said you didn't need a daughter-in-law who couldn't have children. Doesn't that mean a husband who can't father children is just as worthless? I smiled triumphantly at my mother-in-law, who glared at me in anger. Expecting her to lash out, I was surprised when she turned to Ronald and Holly, shouting furiously. I thought they were Ronald's kids. This is unforgivable. Ronald, how could you fall for such a shallow woman? Get a divorce immediately. You have no right to tell me what to do. Don't act high and mighty. You had an affair too. Watching this chaos, my father-in-law sighed deeply. He approached me and said, I'm sorry for the trouble caused by my wife and son. It took time to gather evidence that her lover was also involved with other women. He then spoke calmly to Ronald, my mother-in-law, and Holly. Let's go home. This discussion is endless. We'll continue at home. My father-in-law, with the doctor's help, calmed the three who seemed ready to start a physical fight and took them home. The day after the divorce papers were filed, Ronald and Holly got married, but due to this incident, they divorced within a week. They both complained to their friends, saying they never wanted to see or hear from each other again. My mother-in-law, who ignored Ronald's and my father-in-law's words, listened to her relatives' persuasion, and she finally realized she had been scammed and desperately tried to recover the stolen money. However, the police were already after the con artist, who had disappeared. Moreover, she had used my father-in-law's retirement money without permission, which led him to serve her with divorce papers. Despite her tearful resistance, she eventually gave up. It was also revealed that she had accumulated debt in Ronald's name, leading to a huge fight between Ronald and her. My father-in-law and Ronald left the house, leaving her to live alone in loneliness. After divorcing Holly and moving into an apartment, Ronald paid the alimony in a lump sum to my account. He continued working as if nothing had happened, but when someone from his hometown transferred to the same company, his past troubles came to light. His boss learned about his affair with his ex-girlfriend, their quick remarriage, and subsequent divorce, leading to doubts about his character and his reassignment to a dead-end job. His salary was significantly reduced, and he was no longer seen by his former mistresses, now lives a despairing life, struggling to repay the debts his mother incurred. After the divorce, Holly lived leisurely with the twins, supported financially by her parents. Her wealthy parents paid my alimony in one lump sum, and she informed them that her remarriage to Ronald had failed. However, through my certified mail, it was revealed that Holly had been involved with many men, including Ronald. She was also pregnant with a child whose father was unknown, which enraged her father, leading him to throw her out of the house. Consequently, Holly moved into a shabby apartment and now juggles multiple part-time jobs while raising her children. No longer pressured to have children or controlled to fit someone else's preferences, I now freely grow and dye my hair, enjoying fashion and life. I secured a full-time job, and lately, I've been treating myself to cute clothes from my favorite stores after payday and enjoying extravagant dinners with friends. Every delicious meal reminds me why I work hard. My heart feels light, and I greet each day with a refreshing sense of freedom. Though my marriage failed, my life is just beginning. I plan to enrich both my work and personal life, and continue enjoying my happy days.